Hey everyone, this is the preface and the table of contents to Fritz Sternberg's Capitalism and Socialism on Trial. Just want to look up Fritz Sternberg real quick. Fritz Sternberg lived from 1895 to 1963. He was a German Marxist theorist, economist, sociologist, and socialist politician. His books include, these are all German, translated from German. Not in like real life, I mean in this not in the chip. They're not translated in German, but the titles are translated into English here on the German Wikipedia. The Jews as the Bearers of a New Economy in Palestine, a Study, Vienna, 1921. Imperialism, published in Berlin, 1926. Imperialism and its Critics, 1929. A Revolution in Science, ? Critique of the book by Henryk Großmann, The Law of Accumulation and the Collapse of the Capitalist System, at the same time a positive analysis of imperialism, published in 1930. The Decline of German Capitalism, published in 1932. Fascism in Power, published in 1935. Germany and a Lightning War, published in 1938. From Nazi Sources, Why Hitler Can't Win, published 1939. The German War Strength, How Long Can Hitler Wage War, published in 1939. The Coming Crisis, published in 1947. How to Stop the Russians Without War, published in 1948. Living with the Crisis, The Battle Against Depression and War, 1949. Capitalism and Socialism Before the World Court, 1951. Capitalism and Socialism on Trial, 1951. The End of a Revolution, Soviet Russia from Revolution to Reaction, 1953. Marx and the Present, Development Trends in the Second Half of the 20th Century, 1955. The Military and Industrial Revolution, 1959. Who Will Dominate the Second Half of the 20th Century, 1961. The Poet and Reason, Memories of Bertolt Brecht, published in 1963. And Notes on Marx, Today, published in 1965. I'm going to read some more about his biography. Youth and Studies. Fritz Sternberg was born on July 11, 1895, the fifth child of an educated Jewish family in Breslau. His father was a lawyer. As a 13-year-old high school student, Sternberg first came into contact with socialist ideas. From 1910 onwards, Sternberg occasionally wrote articles for the local social democratic daily newspaper, Der Volkswacht. At the same time, Sternberg joined the Jewish youth movement and came into contact with, amongst others, Martin Buber. After graduating from high school, Sternberg began studying economics in 1913, first in Breslau and then in Berlin. During this time, he worked in various socialist Zionist organizations. What a monster. The beginning of the First World War, which Sternberg viewed as an imperialist war, and the approval of war credits by the Social Democratic faction in the Reichstag led to Sternberg's alienation from the SPD. In May 1916, Sternberg was called up for military service. In occupied Poland, he came into contact with the Bund. In August 1917, he managed to obtain a leave of absence to write his doctorate, The Jews as the Bearers of a New Economy in Palestine, which he completed in the same year. In the following years, up until around 1922, Sternberg was a member of the Zionist socialist Paul Zion. Sternberg experienced the November Revolution in his hometown and was a member of the local Soldiers' Council. New section, Weimar Republic. After a long stay in Vienna in the summer of 1919, during which he also studied psychoanalysis, Sternberg took up a position at Franz Oppenheimer's seminar at the University of Frankfurt in the winter semester of 1919/20, where he both researched, including on cooperatives and marginal utility theory, and taught until 1923. A failed attempt to obtain a postdoctoral qualification and arguments with Oppenheimer prompted Sternberg to give up his university career and devote himself to studies on the analysis of imperialism from 1923 onwards. At the same time, after taking part in the Zionist Congress in Carlsbad in 1921, Sternberg distanced himself from Zionism. Sternberg now moved back to Breslau, partly for financial reasons, where he set up a Marxist discussion group, the nucleus of the later SAPD local group, and worked on his book Imperialism, which was published in 1926. During this time, Sternberg's contacts with well-known artists such as Bertolt Brecht, Leon Feuchtwanger, and Georg Grosch, or Georg Grosch, I don't know how you say it in German, as well as with various Marxist circles and personalities intensified. According to Karl Korsch, Sternberg was the person who had a decisive influence on Brecht's reception of Marxism. The discussions about imperialism gave Sternberg the opportunity gave Sternberg the opportunity to regularly write articles for various publications of the workers' movement and to hold seminars and courses for trade union members and officials, among others. In 1927, Sternberg took part in the Anti-Imperialist Congress in Brussels, and in 1929 and 1930 he visited the Soviet Union twice, where he discussed with Eugen Varga, Karl Vadik, and Nikolai Bukharin, among others. Sternberg's impressions there strengthened his criticism of Stalinism. From 1930, where the hell am I? From 1930 until it was banned in March 1933, Sternberg wrote regularly articles for Die Weltbühne, mostly under the pseudonyms Thomas Tarn and K.L. Gersdorf. During this time, Fritz Sternberg worked with Hans Mayer and Richard Löwenthal. On the 7th of November 1931, Sternberg joined the SAPD, which had been founded a few weeks earlier, and for which he was active almost non-stop over the next few years despite the onset of diabetes. Sternberg appeared as a speaker at SAPD rallies, organized internal training sessions and courses, wrote articles for the party press, and stood unsuccessfully as a candidate in the 1932 Prussian state elections in the first place on the list in the Berlin constituency. Together with Klaus Zweiling, he wrote a draft program for the first SAPD party conference, the economic analysis of which were largely accepted. Within the party, he belonged to the left wing of the party. Together with Zweiling and former KPDO members around Paul Frulich and Jakob Walcher, the leadership of the SJVD, which wanted to develop the SAPD into a revolutionary Marxist party, and was able to prevail in early 1933 against the liquidation curse of the left-wing Social Democratic Pacifist Party leadership around Seydewitz and Kurt Rosenfeld. Exile and post-war period. Since Sternberg was particularly at risk as a Jew and a Marxist after the Nazi Party took power, Sternberg went into hiding after the Reichstag fire and fled from Germany on the 12th of March 1933, disguised as a winter sports enthusiast, over the giant mountains to Czechoslovakia, from where he traveled on to Basel. Sternberg spent the next 3 years there under precarious economic and immigration conditions, and from there organized support for the illegal work of the SAPD in southern Germany. At the end of August/beginning of September 1933, Sternberg met Leon Trotsky, who had been in exile for a time in Rouen, France. The main topic of discussion was the analysis of imperialism, but also the building of a revolutionary Fourth International. In his 1934 book, Fascism and Power, Sternberg predicted that the world was facing a new world war, for which he identified two possible scenarios: either a, quote, total imperialist war against Soviet Russia, end quote, or, quote, on the one side, for example, Japan, Germany, Italy, and satellites, and on the other side, France, the United States with satellites, and Soviet Russia, end quote. In the spring of 1936, Sternberg was expelled from Switzerland and moved to Paris, where the SAPD's exile executive was based. During this time, Sternberg sporadically participated in the Committee for the Preparation of the German Popular Front, until the KPD's defamation of the SAPD as a Gestapo agency made it impossible for him to participate. In the years up to 1939, Sternberg was also one of the main authors in the SAPD newspapers, Die Marxistische Tribune and Die Neue Front, Organ für proletarisch-revolutionäre Sammlung, and regular articles also appeared in the Neue Weltbühne and in bourgeois newspapers such as St. Galler Tagblatt and The Economist. In May 1939, Sternberg entered the USA on a tourist visa. After the outbreak of war, his residence permit was extended by 6 months at a time until he was granted an immigration visa in 1943 and U.S. citizenship in 1948. During this time, Sternberg worked as a freelance journalist for The Nation and The New Republic, among others, and also conducted research into the German war economy with financial support from the Rockefeller Foundation and the Brookings Institute. In 1944, he was one of the signatories of the program of the Council for a Democratic Germany, initiated by the socialist theologian Paul Tillich. At the same time, Sternberg maintained close contacts with important left-wing American trade union leaders, such as Victor Reuter and David Dubinsky, who enabled him to hold trade union training courses, lectures, and seminars at various universities, contributing to his living until the end of the 1950s. In 1950, Sternberg visited Europe for the first time since 1939, where he spoke as a representative of the American Socialists at the International Socialist Rally on the 20th of August in Frankfurt, Maine. In 1951, Sternberg undertook a 3-week trip to Yugoslavia, where he discussed with Edvard Kardelj, among others. From 1954, Sternberg's life shifted back to Europe, but he retained his American citizenship. In the years that followed until his death in 1963, Sternberg was active as a speaker, especially in trade unions and working groups on the left wing of the SPD and the SPO, with an umlaut on top of the O. New section, Remembrance. In May 2006, a stumbling block was laid in front of his former place of residence, Berlin Mitte, Zollstrasse La, I guess. Okay, so back to the text. Preface. The work which culminated in this book was spread over a period of almost 30 years. In 1923, I began work on a book which was entitled Der Imperialismus, or Imperialism, and which was published in German by the Malik Verlag in Berlin and was never translated into English. Many of the basic ideas of the present book were already adumbrated in that book. Some of them were developed further in the following years and set out chiefly in two subsequently published books, Der Niedergang des deutschen Kapitalismus, The Decline of German Capitalism, which was published in German by Rowohlt in Berlin and also never translated into English, and The Coming Crisis, which was published in English in London and New York in 1947 to 48. The actual writing of this book began in 1946 and was completed in the summer of 1950. Fritz Sternberg, New York, 1950. That's the end of the preface. And now, here are the contents. Part 1. The Rise of Capitalism. Chapter 1. Capitalism Conquers the World. And its headings are: Capitalism becomes the dominant form of production, the rise of industrial production, the growth of heavy industry, the growth of urbanization, the rise in national income and wages, the growing role of the industrial workers, the growth of world trade, capitalism in the full tide of development, colonial impoverishment. Chapter 2. European Expansion and Imperialism. And the headings are: Three forms of European expansion, capitalist expansion into areas which maintained their political independence, imperialist expansion, markets develop in the colonies, the function of capital exports, the changing colonial social structure, Marx and colonial industrial development, imperialism and feudalism join hands, the era of double imperialist expansion, imperialism not the same as monopoly capitalism, imperialism and surplus profit. Chapter 3, titled The Crises During the Rise of Capitalism. And the headings are: Crises of Overproduction, Capitalist and Socialist Explanations, Economic Crises in the Period of Primarily Domestic Capitalist Development, Mass Unemployment, Marx on the Development of the English Cotton Industry, Why Unemployment Was So Great, the Rural Migration into the Towns, Increased Exports No Full Solution, Crises in the Period of Imperialist Expansion, Labor Market Conditions Favorable for a Long Time, Emigration Relieved the Pressure on the Labor Market, Imperialism in the Labor Market, Increasing Employment Characterizes Imperialist Expansion, Second Effects. The economic crisis became less violent. The economic crises become less violent. The crises not at regular intervals. Imperialism and Economic Crisis. Chapter 4. U.S. Capitalism Conquers Its Own Land. Headings. The USA from Marx's birth to the November Revolution. The U.S. labor market. The growth of U.S. agriculture. Inter-U.S. expansion up to the First World War. The development of America's home market. The rise of wages. The relative decline of U.S. foreign trade, economic crises in the period of progress, fundamental differences between U.S. and European capitalist expansion, imperialist expansion unimportant for U.S. capitalism, the end of internal expansion coincided with the end of European expansion. Chapter 5, Class Stratification and the Rise of Capitalism, the Changing Social Outlook of the Working Class, Functional relation between, quote, bourgeois and, quote, development of the working class and capitalist expansion. Working class percentage of the total population ceases to grow. No agricultural concentration, but decline in the relative importance of agriculture. Farmers the main contingent amongst independent occupations. Fate of the independent urban middle strata. Class stratification in the, quote, tertiary, end quote, industries. The new middle strata highly susceptible to crises, differences in U.S. and European class stratification outside the capitalist countries, class stratification in the colonial empires. Chapter 6, Imperialist expansion led to war. Germany's growing exports endanger Britain's foreign trade. Signs of stagnation in Britain's economy. A powerful industrial state without an empire. Unfavorable geographic positions of German imperialism. Unfavorable geographic position of German imperialism. Imperialist possessions at variance with changed relations of economic strength. Part 2 of the book. The Epoch of the First World War. Chapter 1. On the eve of the First World War. The Entente Cordiale. Russia's foreign policy and internal difficulties. The growth of imperialist antagonism. The increase of military expenditure. Military expenditure not particularly burdensome. Foreign political tension increases, but social tension declines. No fear of social revolution. Fixed alliances before the First World War. The ruling classes entered the First World War in terms of previous conflicts. No economic general staff or economic preparations. Socialists underestimated capitalist strength. Angles on the coming war. The Basel Manifesto. Chapter 2. The course of the First World War. Germany sought a lightning decision. Germany's failure to make economic industrial preparations robbed her of victory. Germany turns to the East for victory. Germany gets her front war, but the USA intervenes. The USA in the First World War. Appendix to Chapter 2. The role of coal, iron, and steel. Chapter 3. Effects of the First World War on European capitalism. The state and war economy. The First World War closed the period of capitalist progress in Europe. The uniform capitalist trend of world development interrupted. The war shattered the idea of the inevitability of socialism. The war reduced European production by more than 1/3. Europe's position as center of the capitalist world undermined. The USA takes Europe's place. Social polarization begins in Europe. The social structure of agriculture in industrial Europe. Inflation ruined the urban middle strata. Britain's greater social stability. No serious movement for social transformation in Germany. The socialists had no program of action. Section 4. Lenin and the November Revolution. Lenin and the, quote, aristocracy of labor. The November Revolution in Russia. The revolution victorious in the most backward country in Europe. The dictatorship of the proletariat according to Marx. The new constellation of forces after the First World War. Part 3. The period of capitalist stagnation between the two world wars. Chapter 1. Capitalist expansion comes to a stop. Headings. Stagnation of world trade. Expansion to non-European countries came to a stop. Stagnation in the colonial empires. Stagnation in India. The alliance of imperialism and feudalism. Specific conditions of Japanese imperialism. The effect of U.S. expansion. U.S. influence in South America. Chapter 2. Before the World Economic Crisis. Developments in the United States. Industrial concentration. U.S. agriculture not prosperous. Europe from the First World War to the World Economic Crisis in 1929. British exports below peacetime levels. British foreign trade and balance of payments. Unemployment in Britain before the crisis. The position of the British middle strata. Germany before the World Economic Crisis. The inflation and destruction of the urban middle strata. The inflation and the fall in wages. Germany's exports below pre-war levels. The grotesque game of German reparations. Russia from the revolution to the first 5-year plan. The first stage of Russia's agrarian revolution. Lenin introduces the new economic policy. The creation of a new industrial apparatus. The basis of the dictatorship narrows. Russia and the communist parties. Chapter 3. The world economic crisis never fully liquidated. World trade and industrial production decline. Parallel industrial and agricultural crises. The crisis in the middle class. On the causes of the 1929 economic crisis. The new role of the state. No socialist measures during the crisis. The crisis brought a Nazi victory. The middle class were fascism's main basis. The victory of the counter-revolution. The rise of National Socialism. Great Britain and the economic crisis. Japan and the world economic crisis. Soviet Russia and the economic crisis. The first 5-year plan. The economic crisis and Russia's foreign trade. The collectivization of Russian agriculture. Chapter 4. From the crisis to the Second World War. The permanent crisis. World trade before the Second World War. The USA from the New Deal up to the outbreak of the Second World War. No planned economy in the United States. State intervention in the home markets. The growth of the trade unions. America's 200 families. U.S. agriculture and the, quote, New Deal. Great Britain and France from the trough of the crisis to the Second World War. The Nazi state and its war economy. German war economy, the first planned war economy in times of peace. Nazi war economy and German social stratification. The situation of the urban middle strata. The working class and the Nazi war economy. The state and the economic system under the Nazi war economy. Hitler's great foreign political victories. Neo-fascist imperialist expansion. Japanese expansion before the Second World War. The growth of the anti-imperialist forces in Asia. Soviet Russia in the period of the new 5-year plans. The growth in industrial production. The decline of Soviet foreign trade. The development of Soviet agriculture. Collectivization strengthened the power of the dictatorship. The state sector in Soviet agriculture. Soviet trade unionism emasculated. Soviet Russia's answer to Nazi Germany's war economy. World capitalism on the eve of the Second World War. Part 4. The Second World War. Chapter 1. The alliances of the Second World War. Headings. German imperialism threatens both the Western powers and the Soviet Union. The failure of the Franco-British military discussions in Moscow. The Nazi-Soviet Pact. The pact gave the signal for war. The U.S.-British-Russian coalition. Social stability allowed the coalition to last. Stagnation in the European working class movement. Chapter 2. The course of the Second World War. The causes of Germany's lightning victories. The pause between Dunkirk and the attack on Russia. German armaments production did not increase. The individual and world history. Tolstoy and General Halder. The growth of armament production in Russia's Asiatic provinces. The position of the USA in the First World War and the Second. The USA fought a two-front war from the start. Why was the Second Front so long delayed? The Anglo-American-Russian coalition subject to qualification. Anglo-American differences on the question of the Second Front. The war in Asia. The Civil War and the Sino-Japanese War. Japan's war in the European colonial empires. India and the war in Asia. U.S. conduct of the war in Asia. Quantitative effects of the Second World War. Military losses unequal. The difference in productive developments enormous. Part 5. The world of today. Chapter 1. The change in the nature of war. Wars are becoming world wars. The epoch of world powers. The growth of armies and armament sectors. The industrial areas of the world more and more in the fighting line. The armistice economy. The danger of a descent into barbarism. Clausewitz, out of date. Chapter 2. The world relation of forces. The world political background of America's position. Manufacturing employment increased for the first time since 1919. Industrial concentration in the Second World War. Growth of trade unionism and the rise in wages. Planned war economy in the United States. America's post-war economy. U.S. external expansion and the opening up of new markets. U.S. external expansion in a period of capitalist decline. Industrial Europe is the main sphere for U.S. expansion. The main instrument of U.S. expansion is the state. U.S. expansion is underdeveloped in underdeveloped areas. Armaments economy in peacetime. Armament economy crisis and another New Deal. The struggle for power in the state. The Soviet Union and the Russian Empire. Post-war reconstruction was quicker this time. Soviet-Russian living standards very low. Soviet Russia's armament economy after the Second World War. Soviet Russia's expansion. The economic and political transformation of the European satellite states. Russian expansion and imperialism. The Russian Empire in Europe. Living standards in the Russian Empire often higher than in the Soviet Union. Russia's strength compared with the USA. The military strength of the Soviet Union. Expansion not an absolute necessity for the Russians. Soviet Russia's Asiatic expansion. The transformation of Europe. The decline of European influence in Eurasia. European imperialism and the remains of its colonial possessions. Europe's foreign trade and the Marshall Plan. The effects of the Second World War on Germany. America prevented the socialization of the Ruhr. The growth of social antagonism in Germany. A, quote, fifth estate, end quote, of the displaced and bombed out. The social transformation in Great Britain. The socialization of the basic industries. Labor's wage and taxation policy. The difficulties of socialism in Great Britain. Great Britain too small for a democratic socialist transformation. The revolution in Asia. The state a decisive factor. Japan's social and political crisis. The growth of social and political antagonisms increases the danger of war. No arms agreements or neutral zones can avert the threatened danger. A progressive socialist Europe an important factor for peace. And it says epilogue sources index. And I guess I'll read, because why not, the short list of diagrams. Regional distribution of world industrial production, production of capital and consumer goods in Germany, social stratification in Germany, British capital exports, unemployment in Great Britain, index of industrial production in Germany 1860 to 1930, value of world trade 1881 to 1931, parties in the Reichstag, national income and industrial production in Great Britain during the Depression, concentration of control of non-financial and banking corporations in the USA, index of manufacturing and mining production for world in certain countries, 250 largest manufacturing corporations, U.S. government revenue. The end.